Chapter 8. Stand Out. Someone has to. It is easy to follow it along. It can feel strange to do or say something different. But without that unease, there is no freedom. Remember Rosa Parks. The moment you set out an example, the spell of status quo is broken, and another will follow. After the Second World War, European Americans and others created a myth of righteous resistance to Hitler. In the 1930s, however, the dominant attitude had been accommodation and admiration. By 1940, most Europeans had made their peace with the seemingly irresistible power of Nazi Germany. Influential Americans such as Charles Lindbergh opposed war with the Nazis under the slogan, America First. It is those who were considered exceptional, eccentric, or even insane in their own time, those who did not change when the world around them did, who we remember and admire today. Well, before the Second World War, numerous European states had abandoned democracy for some form of right-wing authoritarianism. Italy became the first fascist state in 1922 and was military ally to Germany. Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria had been drawn towards Germany by the promise of trade and territory. In March of 1938, none of the great powers offered any resistance as Germany annexed Austria. In September of 1938, the great powers, France, Italy, Great Britain, then led by Neville Chamberlain, actually cooperated with Nazi Germany in the partitioning of Czechoslovakia. In the summer of 1939, the Soviet Union allied with Nazi Germany, and the Red Army joined the Wehrmacht in the invasion of Poland. The Polish government chose to fight, activating agreements that brought Great Britain and France into the war. Germany, supplied with food and fuel by the Soviet Union, invaded and quickly occupied Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, even France in the spring of 1940. And the remainder of the British Expeditionary Force was evacuated from the continent at Dunkirk in late May and early June of 1940. When Winston Churchill became Prime Minister in May of 1940, Great Britain was alone. The British had won no meaningful battles and no important allies. They had entered the war to support Poland, a cause that seemed lost. Nazi Germany and its Soviet ally dominated the continent. The Soviet Union had invaded Finland in November of 1939, beginning with a bombing of Helsinki. Right after Churchill assumed office, the Soviet Union occupied and annexed the three Baltic states of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The United States had not entered the war. Adolf Hitler had no special animosity towards Britain or its empire, and indeed imagined a division of the world into spheres of interest. He expected Churchill to come to terms after the fall of France. Churchill did not. He told the French that, whatever you may do, we shall fight on for ever and ever and ever. In June of 1940, Churchill told the British Parliament that the battle for Britain is about to begin. The German Luftwaffe began bombing of the British cities. Hitler expected that this would force Churchill to sign an armistice, but he was mistaken. Churchill later called the air campaign a time when it was equally good to live or die. He spoke of the buoyant and imperturbable temper of the British, which I had the honour to express. In fact, he himself helped the British to defend themselves as a proud people who would calmly resist evil. Other politicians would have found support in the British public opinion to end the war. Churchill instead resisted, inspired, and won. The Royal Air Force, including 2 Polish squadrons and a number of other foreign pilots, held back the Luftwaffe. Without control of the air, even Hitler could not imagine an amphibious invasion of Great Britain. Churchill did what others had not done. Rather than concede in advance, he forced Hitler to change his plans. The essential German strategy had been to remove any resistance in the West, and then to invade, thus betray the Soviet Union, and to colonize its western territories. In June of 1941, with Britain still in the war, Germany attacked its Soviet ally. Now Berlin had to fight a two-front war, and Moscow and London were suddenly unexpected allies. In December of 1941, Japan bombed the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, and the United States entered the war. Now Moscow, Washington, and London formed a grand, irresistible coalition. Together, with the help of many other allies, these three great powers won the Second World War. But had Churchill not kept Britain in the war in 1940, there would have been no such war to fight. Churchill said that history would be kind to him because he intended to write it himself. Yet, in his vast histories and memoirs, he presented his own decisions as self evident and credited the British people and British allies. Today, what Churchill did seems normal and right, but at the time, he had to stand out. Of course, Great Britain was only in the war because the Polish leadership had chosen to fight in September of 1939. Open Polish armed resistance was overcome that October. In 1940, the characters of the German occupation was becoming clear in the Polish capital Warsaw. Theresa Prekerowa was meant to finish high school that year. Her family had lost its property to the Germans and was forced to move to Warsaw and rent. Her father was arrested. One of her uncles was killed in battle. Two of her brothers were in the German prisoner of war camps. Warsaw itself had been heavily damaged by a German air campaign, which had killed about 25,000 people. Theresa, a very young woman, stood out among her friends and family in her reaction to this horror. At a time when it was natural to think only about one's self, she thought of others. In late 1940, the Germans began to establish ghettos in the part of Poland under their control. That October, the Jews of Warsaw and the surrounding regions were required to move to a certain district of the city. One of Theresa's brothers had been friendly with a Jewish girl and her family before the war. Theresa now observed that the family quietly allowed their Jewish friends to slip away from their lives. Without telling her family, and at great risk to herself, Theresa chose to enter the Warsaw Ghetto a dozen times in late 1940, bringing food and medicine to the Jews she knew and the Jews she did not. By the end of the year, she persuaded her brother's friends to escape the ghetto. In 1942, Theresa helped the girl's parents and brother to escape. That summer, in the Warsaw Ghetto, the Germans carried out what they called the Great Action, deporting 265,000 Jews to death factories in Treblinka, to be murdered and kill another 10,000 Jews in the ghetto itself. Theresa saved the family from certain death. Theresa later became a historian of the Holocaust, writing about the Warsaw Ghetto and about others who had helped to aid Jews. But she preferred not to write about herself. When, much later, she was asked to speak about her own life, she called her actions normal. From our perspective, her actions seemed exceptional. She stood out.